Hey everybody, John Fenton here. I'm with my great friend, Craig Robinson. Craig, good morning.
Good morning, John. It's good to be here.
Great to have you. Craig, you're an amazing executive, commercial real estate executive, living in New York now for the last 10 years. And you've been a CEO in division of public companies, and you're a Harvard graduate, and you're a passionate human being. And I'm so glad to be with you this morning.
Thank you. You're too kind, John. I really, really appreciate it. It's an honor.
So thank you, Craig. And Craig, you reached out to me and some other folks recently about this pledge that you and some other people co-authored. So tell everybody who's watching or listening, why a pledge? How did this come to be, and why a pledge now?
Yeah, well, a great question, John. Well, let's just start with, kind of the humanity of the situation. Over the past few weeks, I think we've all really struggled to just make sense of what's going on in our nation. And I personally have just gone through the stages of grief, feeling at times, deep, deep sadness and depression and anger and sometimes even rage. And, but I would say today I actually feel resolve. And one of the reasons why I feel resolve is that a handful of, friends and fellow executives, in fact, Black executives got together and we said, you know what, let's channel all of this energy and emotion into something really productive and constructive. But what we didn't want to do is just be a part of the long list and growing, heap of thoughts and prayers, kind of heartfelt expressions that really, at the end of the day, didn't mean anything. And so we said, let's not just write something, let's do something. And so we kind of formed this skunk work team to kind of start crafting what would ultimately be a call to action. And our thought was, let's craft something, that if people and business leaders really care and they really mean some of the things they're putting out there in these ads, then why wouldn't they do, very specific, actionable things that we could say is, as proof and evidence that you really are trying to move us forward. And so we did that. And some of the, questions that folks had for us right out the chute was, why, call on corporate America? Why call on business leaders to do that? Well, we thought for a few reasons. One, we thought it was very powerful for business leaders to kind of issue a call to action to other business leaders. This is us. We get each other. We understand the world that we live and work. But most of all, we said, look, this is not something the government can do alone. These are not something that not-for-profits can do alone. Companies have significant influence. First and foremost, they employ citizens.
Right.
They drive local economies, the local economies of states and cities, where many of the laws and legislation and the police chiefs and the people who actually have an impact on what's happening takes place. And the other thing too, and the reason why we did this as Leadership Now members, Leadership Now Project is an organization comprised of business leaders who really care about promoting, restoring, strengthening our democracy. We know that companies have a deep influence through their lobbying, through their corporate PACs, through the ways in which they direct resources, and therefore, huge impact on legislation and policy. So we thought a call to action to the business community made a ton of sense.
Right on. I think it's so important that, the last decade or so, I've been working with executives and business leaders because we have a major impact on society. We do employ people. Our economy, the strength of our economy is the backbone of our country, right? To keep us moving forward and to create opportunity for everybody. And, I know that, I have not walked in your shoes. Right? I've not walked in a Black man's shoes, so I totally get it. I just learned that from my perspective, we're all human beings. We're all human beings, and we all have the same desires and likes and wants and needs. And how do we can come together and have a conversation? And that's really what we're trying to do today.
That's right. Well, it's interesting. You and I got to know each other doing Leadership Atlanta, and I'm a native of Atlanta. And I'll just share with you, when I graduated from college, I went to MIT, and I can remember with one of my good buddies loading up my Honda Accord the last day of class. I just finished my last exam, and I filled my Honda Accord with all of my dorm stuff, and we drove from Boston to Georgia. And literally, as soon as we crossed the Georgia border, we got pulled over by state troopers. Mm-hmm. And I that was one of my first experiences, driving while being Black. where the officer said, you look suspicious, and just pulled us over and began to just give us a hard time. And just imagine like the moment at which you're entering life as an adult, and beginning to think about your future, you're excited. This harsh reality of, yes, but you're still a Black man. And I don't care what school you went to. I don't care what dreams and ambitions you have ahead of you. You're going to pull over and you're going to humble yourself, and you're going to be really, really careful not to offend the state trooper. And so, and I would have many other experiences like that. But unfortunately, John, that it is the reality, and my identity makes that likely to be a reality going forward.
What we're trying to do is to really have dialogue. Both, I mean, what's come to, I mean, from my perspective, being a white man and growing up in this country, you know, there's this undertone, if you will, I'll call it even underbelly of racism throughout our country that we've never really been able to deal with as a country, right? Going from the beginning of this country, really.
Yep.
And my hope is now this is a time where leaders, business leaders and other leaders can step up and make a difference, make a real difference in how we view the world and how we treat other people in creating opportunities. And tell me more about the pledge.
Absolutely. Well, listen, and first and foremost, you and I agree that business leaders, because of the role, good or bad, and I lend on the side of thinking some of the influence that companies have on our government is bad. But look, if we are stewards of these platforms and these resources, let's understand first and foremost the power they have. So we're calling on companies to do three things, and to focus on three areas. There are many areas that we could focus on as it relates to institutional structural racism, but we think these three are a good start. Police reform, civic participation, and economic inclusion. And let me just walk you through why we picked those and kind of what we think some of the specific actions are for each of them. So let's start with policing. It starts there because, John, that's the reason why we're having this conversation today, because of the murders, and I'm using that language, of innocent Black people at the hands of police. And if we as business leaders are uncomfortable expressing that truth, then we're already part of the problem. And so, look, there are some things that businesses can do. You can support financially police reform. You don't need to be an expert in police reform. I'm not an expert in police reform, but there are lots of organizations out there that are using research, data, facts, evidence-based approaches to how we can, bring about racially just policing. And so we've got some examples of that in our pledge. Two, in cities where your company has a big presence, perhaps you have a big employee base, you do big conferences, something where, you are a big part of that local economy. Use that leverage to compel mayors and city legislators to make police reform an important, if not top of the ticket type thing. Number three, look at your own corporate spend and PAC dollars and lobbying, and just make sure you're not part of the problem. You're not supporting politicians or platforms that are like really counter to the reform. And you may not even know it. So just look in-house. The second thing is civic participation and safe ballot. Look, you're still in Georgia, I'm in New York, and we watch with, disgust and awe at what just happened in Georgia last week as it relates to, kind of all of the issues around kind of voter turnout and listen, voter suppression is just another form of systemic racism, period, point blank. And so there are things that, companies can do to support making sure that everybody participates in the civic process. One, donate and support organizations that protect voter rights, like the NAACP, like Black Voters Matters. There are others. Number two, like advocate for, safe voting, particularly during this COVID area, like safe ballot access. And for people to go stand in lines and crowds and not, even know whether or not they're going to get a chance to vote and all that type of stuff, and then expose themselves to like physical harm and danger, that's a problem. So, policing, civic engagement. The third, which I think we all get as business leaders, is economic inclusion. So racism not only impacts individuals like myself, and I've just shared with you just some of the examples but they're
Right.
countless. They don't have to always be being pulled over by police and facing, certain death. It can be subtle. It could be being blocked from promotions, not getting jobs. I mean, there's lots and lots of ways in which it shows up. But by and large, racism, affects the entire U.S. economy. You think about like the level of unemployment we have right now, over 30 million people, and how hard hit neighborhoods like my own. I live in Harlem, New York right now. Neighborhoods like these are getting hit really, really, really hard. So as we start talking about reopening our economy, rebuilding our economy, let's just make sure it's an inclusive one. And there's some things that we think companies can do to be a part of the solution. Number one, let's move past D&I language and conversations. Let's talk about anti-racist initiatives and programs and metrics so that we know that our companies are being accountable. Let's get serious about fair representation up and down the org chart, from entry-level jobs to VP to C-suite to board seats. Really important that many of the companies who proclaim their solidarity with Black people over the past few weeks, go look at their corporate boards, look at their executive teams. Actions speak louder than words. And if you come to me and say, well, Craig, we don't know where to find great people. You know what? Listen, there are lots of organizations and professional associations for entry-level programs that work with Black communities, all the way up to professional organizations. The help is there. That is not an excuse. And I'll say the third thing you can do is be thoughtful about how you spend your money. Invest in Black businesses, Black entrepreneurs, fund managers. When we talk about supplier diversity, let's make sure that Black businesses aren't lost in kind of the shuffle, because oftentimes that's what happens. Some of the businesses, we talk about PPP loans, many of the businesses that were Black owned or owned by people of color did not get that money.
Right.
So let's make sure that companies are conscious and specifically and deliberately pointing dollars that way. So those three things are police reform, civic engagement, economic inclusion. And look, we can talk about healthcare, we can talk about education, we can talk about housing, but let's just start with these three. These things are things we can do. They're common sense, they're reasonable, and they're in the power and purview of companies.
That's so important, Craig. Thank you. And thank you for summarizing that. So for our listeners and the people watching today, what's the call to action to them? What can they do, and how can they sign on to the pledge or find more out about the pledge? Blah, blah, blah. And so tell them how they can find the pledge.
Yeah, absolutely. Visit our website, which is leadershipnowproject.org. leadershipnowproject.org, all one word. And you'll see a tab on the landing page for our Business for Racial Equity Pledge. Click that button and you'll see tons of details about what I just described. But more specifically, you'll see an opportunity to sign. We're calling on everyone to sign the pledge. And once you sign the pledge, sign it today, by the way, sign it right now. Once you sign the pledge, immediately send it to your network, your personal and your professional network. You don't need to be a CEO or business leader, because ultimately everyone has the potential to put pressure on companies. Top down, we love CEOs, executives and board directors to say, this is something we want our company to do. But we also want employees and consumers to put pressure on companies and say, are you doing this? And these are things that you can do. Are you doing them? So, we do this. As of today, John, we've got over 900 signatures, of which 45% are CEOs, executives, board directors, which we're feeling really, really excited that this just within a week has gotten that much support. Our goal is by Juneteenth to have 1,000 signatures. This is a symbolic day. And our goal is to not only hit 1,000, but to go well past that. Once we hit 1,000 signatures, we have the credibility, we have the campaign, but we have really what is the beginning of a long-term sustained conversation with corporate America. And then we'll continue to bring people onto the platform. But our goal thereafter is to really start providing the tools, the resources, the infrastructure to really compel companies to turn this into action.
Well, I've signed the pledge and I've shared it with my CEO friends, and I'm so excited to be able to help you get the word out. So today, act today, because Juneteenth is June 19th. That's today. So go to the website, find the pledge, and take action now.
John, thanks so much. And thanks to all of your listeners. Join us. The time is now. We're excited we can do this.
Great, Craig. Thank you so much.